The ballroom was filled with expensive perfumes and empty conversations when Valentina Hayes noticed the girl. It wasn't difficult. Amidst so many adults in tuxedos and long gowns, the child was completely alone in the farthest corner of the ballroom, behind a white marble column that stretched from floor to ceiling. She was turning a small music box between her fingers, with such absolute concentration that she seemed to have erected an invisible wall around herself. 7 years old, perhaps. Straight black hair falling in a loose ponytail, a navy blue dress with delicate lace on the sleeves that someone had chosen with all the care in the world. But the girl kept tugging at the collar of her dress as if it were suffocating her, over and over, with that mechanical insistence of someone seeking relief and finding none. Valentina adjusted the crystal tray on her forearm and resumed her route among the guests. It was her third event for Metropolitan Star Catering in 6 weeks, and she had already learned the golden rule of this type of work. Smile, serve, disappear. The wealthy didn't hire waitstaff to be reminded they existed, but the girl kept turning that music box. Mrs. Eleanor appeared beside her with that silent skill of someone who had known every inch of that mansion for over 20 years. She was a petite woman, with completely white hair pulled back in a tight bun, with a posture that said, without needing words, that she was the one who kept that house standing. Her eyes, small and dark, assessed everything at once, and Valentina felt the weight of that gaze settle upon her with surgical precision. "Don't go near her," the housekeeper said in a very low voice without stopping. "Sophia doesn't like people close. If you scare the girl, she'll scream. The event will stop, and Dr. Enzo won't need any explanation to dismiss the entire service." Valentina looked at the child, then at Mrs. Eleanor, who had already moved away towards the kitchen, and then again at the girl in the navy blue dress behind the column. The orchestra installed on the covered veranda began to play an old waltz, one of those melodies that exist before they have a name. That seemed to have been written for a world that has already ended, and it was then that something happened that Valentina couldn't explain later when she tried to put it into words for her own mother on the phone, 3 days later. The girl stopped turning the music box. She remained absolutely still for an entire second, as if the rhythm of the music had reached her in a deep place where words and protocols couldn't penetrate. Her fingers continued to move, subtly, to the beat. Only her fingers. Valentina handed the tray to the nearest colleague without saying a word. She crossed the ballroom slowly, with that calculated naturalness of someone going to fetch something from the kitchen, weaving through groups of guests without drawing attention. When she reached the vicinity of the marble column, she stopped about 2 meters away from the child. She didn't crouch down to be at her height. She didn't use that high-pitched voice that adults invent when they think they're communicating with children. She simply stood there, letting Sophia notice her in her own time. The girl didn't look at her for a long minute. She kept her eyes on the music box, which now lay still in the palm of her hand, as if it were a bird that might fly away if she relaxed her fingers. Valentina waited. She was the daughter of a nurse from rural Vermont, and one of the first things she learned inside a hospital, even as a child, was that haste is the language of fear, not of care. Slowly, Sophia's dark eyes lifted. They traveled up Valentina's flat shoes, up her black catering apron, up her face without excessive makeup, until they rested on the young woman's brown eyes. It was a look of assessment, not of fear. Sophia was deciding whether that presence deserved the cost of her attention. Valentina held her gaze calmly, without forcing a smile, without blinking excessively, just there, present. Then slowly she extended her right hand, palm turned upwards, fingers relaxed, an invitation that required no response, that was capable of existing in the world even if no one accepted it. She didn't say, "Shall we dance?" She didn't say anything. It was 4 seconds that for Valentina weighed like 4 years. Sophia looked at the hand, looked back at Valentina's face, returned her eyes to the hand as if calculating a probability that no known mathematics covered. And then, with a delicacy that stole the air from Valentina's lungs without warning, she placed her own small fingers in that open palm. The two began to move together, away from the other guests, in the space that was theirs and no one else's. Valentina followed the rhythm Sophia set, not the other way around. She didn't try to lead. She simply accompanied, as if she were the apprentice in that dance, as if the girl knew something about the right rhythm that she was still trying to discover. Sophia didn't look at Valentina's face. She looked at some point in the middle distance, in that way people have when they are listening to music from within. But she didn't let go of her hand, and that was everything. The ballroom gradually fell silent in waves. A couple of executives stopped talking. A woman in a red dress touched her husband's arm and pointed discreetly. Two directors of a construction company suspended the discussion about financing rates they were having a moment before. Little by little, like a turning tide, the guests of the Drummond family gala dinner turned towards that scene in the corner. A waitress in a black uniform and a girl in a blue dress, dancing a gentle waltz behind a marble column, separated from the world by their own concentration. Valentina only noticed that Dr. Enzo Drummond was in the room when the music ended. He stood between two other businessmen near the window. But he wasn't like them. He was taller, with shoulders slightly hunched inwards, with that kind of tension in his jaw of someone who has been holding something heavy for too long. In his eyes was an expression Valentina recognized before she could name it. It was the look of someone about to cry who no longer knows how to do it. In his right hand, a glass of white wine trembled very slightly. Sophia released Valentina's hand as soon as the first applause began. She took 2 steps back towards the column, hugging the music box against her chest. Valentina let her go. She didn't try to hold on. She didn't try to prolong it. She simply stayed where she was, facing the child exactly as before, letting Sophia decide the space between them. Mrs. Eleanor appeared beside Valentina and gently but firmly guided her by the elbow towards the kitchen. She didn't say a word during the journey, but the grip of her fingers conveyed something that wasn't anger. It was more like a silent re-evaluation. The rest of the event passed like a warm mist. Valentina served, smiled, circulated, and the image of Sophia placing her fingers in that open palm did not leave her mind. She wasn't a psychologist. She had no special training in child development or therapy. She was the only child of Constance Hayes, a nurse at Maplewood General Hospital, Vermont, and had moved to New York City 3 years earlier to pay a debt she hadn't asked to inherit. In a 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria that she shared with 2 other colleagues. She worked during the day at a stationery store in Chelsea and took weekend events to make ends meet. But she had understood something about that girl that didn't fit into any protocol. It was almost 11 at night when Mrs. Eleanor came back for her. "Dr. Enzo wants to speak with you in his office," the housekeeper said, and this time the expression was impossible to classify. It wasn't hostility. It seemed like caution, but also, very deeply buried, something that resembled hope. Enzo Drummond's office was a place that revealed its owner without him needing to speak. Large, with clipboards and models on the central table, architecture books with marked pages, a ficus plant in the corner that needed water. On the walls, diplomas from American and European universities, and a framed photograph on a shelf that Valentina didn't have time to properly see before he spoke. "Please, sit." His voice was deep, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the late hour. Valentina sat. Enzo remained standing, his back to her, looking through the window glass at the illuminated garden outside. The sprinklers rotated silently. A considerable time passed before he spoke again. "My daughter hasn't allowed anyone to touch her for 3 years," he said. "Therapists, doctors, family members, no one." Valentina remained silent. She let the statement occupy the space it deserved. "You didn't know her. You didn't follow any protocol, and she danced with you." He paused. "Why?" "I don't know exactly," Valentina replied carefully. "But I don't think it was me." The waltz started, and Sophia was already listening from within. "I just offered my hand. She chose to put hers in it." Enzo turned around. He looked at her with that intensity of a man accustomed to evaluating projects, looking for cracks, points of collapse, fragile foundations. "I need a full-time caregiver for Sophia, live-in, here at the house." He paused for a long time. "I know this isn't a reasonable selection process, but I'm tired of reasonable processes that go nowhere." Valentina thought of the stationery store in Chelsea, of the debt that still had 14 months to be paid off, of her mother who called every week from Maplewood, Vermont, to ask if she was okay, and to whom she always said yes. She thought of the small fingers resting in her palm. "When do I start?" she asked. And the most reserved architect in that room seemed, for a fraction of a second so brief that Valentina later doubted if she had seen it, to truly breathe for the first time that night. The next morning, Valentina woke up at 6 in a room that wasn't hers. It was a small room on the second floor of the Drummond mansion, with a window facing the back garden, a single bed with an ironed white bedspread, and a pine wardrobe that smelled of lavender. In the bathroom, towels folded into triangles like in a hotel, and a bar of soap still wrapped in craft paper. Someone had prepared that room even before she accepted the offer. Valentina lay there for a moment, looking at the smooth ceiling, listening to the house. It was the kind of silence that only exists in very large and very sad houses. At 7:30, she went down to the kitchen and found Mrs. Eleanor preparing coffee with that efficiency of someone who has been doing the same thing for years, without needing to think. The housekeeper placed a cup on the table without asking if Valentina wanted coffee, because it was impossible for someone awake at 7 in the morning not to want coffee. Then she sat in the chair opposite and folded her hands on the table. "I'll explain how things work here," she said, "because it's better you hear it from me than discover it on your own and make an irreversible mistake." Valentina held the cup with both hands and listened. Sophia had a rigid routine. She woke at 8, bathed with the water temperature always the same, had breakfast with the same foods in specific positions on the plate. At 9, she received a visit from Dr. Leo Maxwell, a child neurologist who had been following her case for 2 years, 3 times a week. In the afternoon, there was a period of free activity in the garden, which in practice meant the girl sitting on a large stone near the fountain turning her music box. At 4, a snack. At 6, dinner. At 8, bed. "And the music?" Valentina asked. Mrs. Eleanor paused. She looked at the coffee in her own cup. "There is no music in this house," and she said slowly. "No exceptions. No radio, no television with sound above the minimum, no loud cell phones ringing. Dr. Enzo has a reason for this, and it's not my place to explain what it is. What I know is that this is a rule that is not to be discussed." Valentina wanted to ask more. She didn't. "Last thing," Mrs. Eleanor said, getting up. "Sophia won't like you right away. What happened last night was extraordinary, but extraordinary doesn't mean repeatable. You'll have days when she'll ignore everything you do, days when she'll cry non-stop, days when she'll try to isolate herself in her room, and you won't even be able to touch the doorknob without her noticing. Are you prepared for that?" "No," Valentina replied honestly, "but I don't think anyone would be." The housekeeper looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time since they met, Mrs. Eleanor showed something that wasn't exactly a smile, but was in the same family. "Dr. Enzo leaves at 8 and returns at 7. Sometimes he doesn't return. I take care of the house. You take care of Sophia, and if you need help with her, come talk to me before you talk to the doctor. He has a lot on his mind." Sophia appeared at the kitchen door at 8:05. She was in blue pajamas with moon prints and carried the music box in her left hand. She stopped at the doorframe and looked at Valentina with that same silent, calculating gaze from the night before. Assessing, deciding. Valentina didn't get up. She didn't wave. She continued with her coffee cup in hand, looking back at the girl calmly. 30 seconds later, Sophia entered the kitchen and sat in her usual chair on the left side of the table, without looking at anyone else. That, Valentina would learn over the following weeks, was permission. The first few days were silent. Valentina accompanied Sophia closely without invading, stayed in the same room without demanding interaction, enjoyed the garden at the same time the girl sat on the fountain stone, but always at a respectful distance. She didn't try to play games. She didn't try to talk. She simply existed in the same space, making her presence predictable and therefore safe. Dr. Leo Maxwell arrived on the first Wednesday with a folder full of reports and a gentle energy that Valentina immediately liked. He was a man in his 40s, with graying hair at his temples and thick-framed glasses that he was always adjusting as he spoke. He talked with Valentina for half an hour before the session with Sophia in the garden, with a frankness she hadn't expected. Sophia has a very rich internal communication level, he said, adjusting his glasses. The problem has never been her capacity. It was the trauma combined with the grief of losing a central reference. When the two things came together, she decided that the external world was no longer safe enough to be worth the risk. The grief, Valentina said cautiously. Mrs. Eleanor mentioned that something happened to her mother 3 years ago. Dr. Leo was quiet for a moment. He ran a hand through his hair. That's a conversation for you to have with Dr. Enzo, he said carefully. Not because I'm hiding something from you. It's because he's her father and because the story belongs to him to tell when he's ready. Pause. What I can tell you is that Sophia lost contact with the person who was her greatest communication anchor. And what you did on the night of the party, offering your hand without words, was exactly the language Lara used with her. Lara. It was the first time anyone had said the name. And the way the doctor said it, with that lightness of someone trying not to let the weight show, said much more than the words. Valentina didn't sleep well that night. She kept thinking about Lara, about who she was, about what had happened 3 years earlier that had swept music from the house and turned a clearly intelligent and capable man into an archive of himself. Were there photos of Lara around the house? She searched discreetly in the following days. There weren't. No photographs in the hallways, no images over the fireplace, no portrait on a shelf, as if someone had gone through every room and removed every piece of evidence that that woman had ever existed. The second week brought the first real breakthrough. Valentina had begun a silent experiment. Little by little, she introduced rhythm into interactions with Sophia in ways that didn't involve sound. She gently tapped her fingers on the table while they were together in the kitchen, in a 2-1-2 pattern, and waited. On the third day, Sophia tapped back, once, without looking up. The following week, Valentina introduced a second pattern. Sophia responded to the second pattern before she finished. A language was being built there, still without words, still without names, but real. It was on a Thursday afternoon that Valentina discovered the cabinet. She was organizing a storage room at the end of the second-floor hallway, at Mrs. Eleanor's request, who wanted to free up space for extra sheets. The cabinet was deep and smelled of cedar and stagnant time. There were boxes marked with old dates, blankets rolled in plastic bags, a carefully stacked collection of architecture magazines. And in the deepest corner, almost hidden behind a Christmas box, there was a small, faded brown leather suitcase without a tag. Valentina brought it to the light and carefully opened the clasp. Inside, carefully folded by someone who had put them away with love, were handwritten sheet music. Pages and pages of musical notes written by hand in a script leaning to the right. On some pages there were notes in the margins, words like "softer here" and "let the silence breathe." And at the bottom of the suitcase, wrapped in a beige silk scarf, was a pair of pink ballet slippers, their tips worn from real use, not from sitting still. Valentina remained silent for a long moment. On the cover of the first sheet music, in a different, larger handwriting, was a dedication. For my Sophia. Each note of this music is a piece of you. With love, Mama Lara. Valentina closed the suitcase slowly. She placed it on her lap and sat on the hallway floor for a time she couldn't measure. Outside, through the window glass, she could hear the garden, the sound of the fountain. And beneath it, almost inaudible, the sound of fingers tapping a familiar rhythm on a stone. 2-1-2. Sophia was there, waiting. And something in that girl's life was stored in that suitcase, also waiting for someone brave enough to open it. Valentina didn't show the suitcase to Enzo Drummond, not that week nor the next. She stored it at the back of her own wardrobe and thought about it while folding clothes, while preparing Sophia's snack, while lying awake at 11 at night, listening to the heavy silence of that house. There was a voice inside her that told her to return the suitcase to where it was and pretend it had never existed. It was the voice of common sense, the voice of the temporary waitress who knew very well her place and which boundaries were not hers to cross. But there was another voice, deeper, the voice that had extended a hand to a child no one else was trying to reach. Meanwhile, the work continued. The language of rhythm that Valentina had begun to build with Sophia grew organically, like a plant that no one planned, but that takes up the space it finds available. 2 fingers tapping on the table. Yes. 4 fingers tapping. No. An open palm on the surface. I'm here. 2 taps on the arm of her own armchair. I want to be alone. Valentina wrote everything down in a small blue notebook that she kept in her apron pocket, sometimes in words, sometimes in small drawings that even she didn't quite understand, but which made sense at the moment she made them. Dr. Leo was impressed when Valentina showed him the little notebook the following Wednesday. "This is genuine alternative communication," he said, turning the pages carefully. "It's not a protocol. You invented a language." "She invented it," Valentina corrected. "I just paid attention." The doctor adjusted his glasses and looked at her in a way she couldn't classify. It seemed like the look of someone who was revising an opinion they had formed in haste. On the 15th day, Valentina made her first attempt with music. It was discreet as she could manage. She left her cell phone on the toy room table, volume at minimum, playing a soft instrumental melody. No lyrics, no overly marked rhythm, just piano notes flowing like water over stone. And she sat on the rug with Sophia, pretending to read a book, waiting. For 20 minutes, Sophia didn't react. She continued with the music box on her lap, fingers moving in the usual pattern. Then, in the 21st minute, the girl slightly raised her head, not to look at Valentina, to listen. Her entire body changed, as if there was less resistance in it, as if the music filled some space that had long been empty. Sophia's fingers changed their pattern. They began to follow the notes coming from the cell phone. Valentina held her breath and said nothing. The following week, she increased the volume by a hair. Sophia didn't complain. The week after, she changed the melody for a slightly richer piece, with variations in rhythm. The girl responded to each variation with her body, tilting her head, changing the pattern of her fingers, as if she were having a conversation with the notes, as if it were a language she had spoken before and that her body still remembered, even if her voice had forgotten. It was on a Saturday afternoon that Valentina opened the suitcase. Enzo had left early. It was rare for him to work on Saturdays, but there was an important bid, and the office needed him. Mrs. Eleanor was at the market. The house was calm, the afternoon light entering through the blinds in wide, golden, warm streaks. Valentina brought the suitcase to the toy room, where Sophia was sitting on the rug, aligning small ceramic figures in a pattern only she knew. She placed the suitcase on the floor slowly, without making a sound, and sat on the other side of it. Sophia didn't look up. Valentina opened the clasp. The sound of metal was the only noise in the room. She carefully took out the silk scarf and unfolded it, revealing the pink ballet slippers. Sophia's reaction was immediate and completely silent. The girl stopped aligning the figures. The movement of her fingers froze. Valentina could swear the very air in the room became denser. Slowly, as if reacting to something she couldn't name, but which was both new and very old, Sophia turned her face. She looked at the slippers. Valentina said nothing. She just slightly lifted the scarf with both hands, offering without forcing. Sophia crawled across the rug to the suitcase. She stopped an arm's length away, looked again at the slippers, then at Valentina, then back. And then, with a delicacy that made it painful to watch, she picked up the slippers with both hands and brought them against her chest. She closed her eyes. Valentina felt her throat tighten so hard that she had to look away for a second. When she looked back at Sophia, the girl's eyes were open, and there was a smile on her face. Not the performative smile of someone who learned that smiling is what adults expect. It was the real involuntary thing born before the person decides, a smile that cost 3 years. Valentina smiled back, and it was almost impossible not to cry. She went to the kitchen, got the sheet music from the suitcase, and returned. She opened one of them and placed it on the rug. Sophia looked, still hugging the slippers. Her eyes scanned the staff with an intensity Valentina hadn't expected. It wasn't the look of a child looking at meaningless scribbles. It was recognition. Valentina picked up her cell phone and searched for the simplest composition in the sheet music, trying to find an online match. She didn't find one. The sheet music was original, unpublished, composed for a single person. She began to hum the melody from the sheet music, by ear, making many mistakes, trying again. Sophia watched her throughout the process, with that absolute attention she reserved for very few things. And then, when Valentina reached a progression of notes that was correct, the girl did something that stopped the world. She tapped her feet on the rug. A rhythm, precise, correct. The exact rhythm of the melody Valentina was humming. The two stayed like that for 40 minutes that passed like 5. Valentina humming, making mistakes, correcting. Sophia responding with her feet, with her fingers, sometimes tilting her head as if asking her to repeat a section. A lesson and a therapy session and a conversation all at once. When Enzo Drummond opened the toy room door at 6:30 in the afternoon, he found his daughter wearing her mother's ballet slippers on her own feet, spinning in slow circles, while Valentina hummed a melody and clapped her hands softly. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then Enzo's voice cut through the air with a coldness Valentina had never heard from a human being. "What are you doing?" Sophia stopped spinning. She looked at her father. And in that look there was something Valentina recognized with a tightening in her chest, fear that it would be taken away. "Dr. Enzo, let me explain," she began. "No." He took a step into the room. His eyes were fixed on the slippers on his daughter's feet, and something in that face was unraveling in a way that was dangerous to observe. "I said clearly, no music in this house. No objects from no these things. I said this on the first day. Sophia needs this to communicate. She responded to the music in a way I've never seen her respond to anything. I couldn't just... You can't just anything." His voice was controlled, but only by a fraction. "You've worked here for 3 weeks. You know nothing about this child, about this family, about what these things represent. You disobeyed a fundamental rule." Valentina took a deep breath. She felt the heat rising in her neck. That specific heat when an injustice is being committed and the wronged person needs to decide in seconds whether to swallow it or not. She didn't swallow. "The slippers were Sophia's mother's," Valentina said firmly, without shouting, without backing down. And Sophia took 3 seconds to hug them, as if they were the most precious thing in the world. "Do you want to tell me that's something to be protected from her?" Enzo's jaw tightened. "This conversation is over," he said. "Take the slippers, return the sheet music, and tomorrow morning I want to speak with you in my office at 8. He left the room. Sophia stared at the empty doorway for a long moment. Then she looked at Valentina. In the girl's eyes there was no anger. There was a question, as clear as if it had been spoken aloud. "Are you leaving?" Valentina slowly knelt down until she was at Sophia's height. She extended her hand. An invitation, not an answer. Just, "I'm here." And the small hand rested in her palm, as it had done on the night of the ball, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But this time Valentina knew that the next morning's conversation could end everything. At 8 o'clock sharp in the morning, Valentina knocked on the office door. She had slept little. She had lain on the narrow bed in the cedar and lavender room, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing what she would say, discarding it, rehearsing again. At 5 in the morning she had given up on sleeping, made coffee and sat in the dark kitchen writing everything she had observed about Sophia in the last 3 weeks in her blue notebook. Not to defend herself, to gain clarity. There was a difference between defending herself and defending that child, and Valentina wanted to make sure she knew which of the two she was doing. The voice from the other side of the door took longer than expected to answer. "Come in." The office was different from the first night. The desk was covered with crumpled papers, as if someone had spent the night working without really working. A cup of cold coffee on the left side. The blinds were closed, and this on an early October morning in New York City, which promised sunshine. Enzo stood near the closed window, his back to her, still in yesterday's clothes. Valentina stood near the door. She waited. "I can't look at the slippers," he said, without turning around. It wasn't the start of a conversation she had expected. She remained quiet. "When I saw them on Sophia's feet, the first thing I thought wasn't anger at you. The first thing was that I wasn't ready." Pause. "I'm never ready." Valentina waited another moment before speaking. "Can Dr. Enzo tell me what happened?" The silence had texture. It had weight. It had the specific weight of 3 years of a story no one had told aloud because telling it made it real, and real was too much. Enzo turned around. His eyes were red, with the kind of red that isn't from recent crying. It's from months of accumulated sleep deprivation. He walked to the chair behind the desk and sat down, but not like a man taking a throne. Like a man who finally stops walking because his legs gave out. "Lara was a pianist," he began. "A pianist and a ballerina. She had stopped performing when Sophia was born, because she wanted to, not because I asked. She said she had an audience of 1 now, and that audience deserved the best show in the world." His voice didn't tremble in that section, but it became slower, like someone choosing each word carefully so they wouldn't bring the images with them. Sophia was 4 years old when they both went to an afternoon dance performance at the Chelsea Arts Centre, a show by a ballerina friend of Lara's. I was supposed to pick them both up at the end. A meeting with an important Middle Eastern client had been delayed, and I called Lara and told her I would be late. I asked her to take a taxi. Valentina remained very still. The taxi collided with another car at an intersection on Lexington Avenue. It was a bureaucratic accident, the kind that happens 100 times a day in this city. A side impact, broken glass. He stopped. Sophia came out with a scratch on her arm and the fright of the century. Lara lost consciousness at the moment of impact. They were both admitted to the emergency room at Manhattan General Hospital. Valentina wasn't breathing. I arrived 40 minutes later. Sophia was in the hallway with a nurse, wrapped in a blanket, not speaking, staring into space. I hugged her and rushed to find out about Lara. A long pause. They told me she had been admitted, but she wasn't there anymore. "What do you mean?" Valentina said, and her own voice sounded different. She had regained consciousness after about 20 minutes, still disoriented according to the report. She had gotten off the gurney while the team was attending to a multiple accident. She had left the hospital. Enzo placed his hands on the table, one on top of the other, as if he needed to restrain them. They thought she had gone to the restroom. When they realized she hadn't returned, they searched the entire hospital. I searched the entire hospital. I called the police. I called everyone she knew. The room became so silent that Valentina could hear her own pulse. "She disappeared," Enzo said. It wasn't a sentence. It was a realization that was still being processed after 1,000 days. There's no record of anything after that. No calls, no hospitals, no police stations. Lara Drummond simply vanished without a trace. Valentina felt the floor change texture beneath her own feet, even though she hadn't moved. "And Sophia was in the back seat when all this happened," she said slowly. She saw the impact. She saw her mother lose consciousness. She waited in that hospital hallway for 40 minutes without knowing anything. Enzo clenched his jaw. "When I arrived, she was no longer speaking. She hasn't said a word in 3 years. Doctors say mutism is a response to trauma combined with her condition, that she needs time and security to return." Valentina thought of Dr. Leo saying Sophia had lost her communication anchor. She thought of the girl holding the slippers against her chest with her eyes closed. She thought of the smile that had cost 3 years. "I removed music from the house because every time I heard anything, any note, I thought of Lara," Enzo continued. "And thinking of Lara paralyzes me. I have a company, I have projects, I have a daughter who needs me, and I can't afford to be paralyzed." He looked at Valentina with an expression that wasn't anger and never had been. It was the opposite. It was someone who had built a wall to survive and was beginning to understand that the wall was on the wrong side. "I was wrong to take music away from Sophia." "Yes," Valentina said carefully, "not cruel, honest. But you were also wrong to do that without talking to me first." "Yes," she agreed. A long moment. "Did she smile?" he asked. His voice was lower now. Valentina looked at him. The architect's hardened demeanor had receded a few inches, enough to reveal the father's face underneath. And the father's eyes were fixed on her, waiting for an answer he had waited for 1,000 days. "It was the most beautiful smile I've ever seen," Valentina said. Enzo looked away. He stared at the closed window for a while, and Valentina had the delicacy not to observe him as he reorganized something within himself. "Continue," he finally said. "Just that." Valentina nodded and left the office. That same afternoon, there was a folded note under her bedroom door. A small square of stationery written in that engineer's handwriting that gets straight to the point. Just 2 words. "Sorry, continue." She kept the note in her blue notebook. That night, after Sophia was asleep, Valentina sat on her bed with the sheet music on her lap and her cell phone in her hand. She began to photograph each page, each score, carefully so as not to miss any of the margin notes. Then she opened a browser and began to search. Lara Drummond, pianist, New York City, composer, ballerina, missing. There were a few old mentions. An interview in a culture magazine 12 years ago, when Lara had performed at a chamber music festival at the Chelsea Arts Centre. A small, slightly blurry photo. A woman with dark hair and a luminous expression sitting at the piano in profile. A glowing review that called her a pianistic voice of rare authenticity. And then, nothing. The digital silence of a person who had left the stage to be a mother and then had left the world without warning. Valentina stared at the photo for a long time. Then, almost without realizing what she was doing, she opened another tab and searched. Female composers, piano, upstate New York chamber music 2022-2023. She scrolled through the result pages without knowing exactly what she was looking for. It was late, she was tired, and there was probably nothing to find. But then she stopped. On a simple website for a music school in Fairview, Connecticut, there was a post from December of the previous year about an end-of-year performance, and in the list of participating teachers, there was a name that made Valentina's eyes blink twice before she could read it properly. Laura Mendez, piano and composition. Below the name, a link to an amateur recording of a live performance. Valentina clicked. The video was dark, the camera shaky, the sound distant. But the melody that filled the room coming from the small speaker of her cell phone was unmistakable. It was the same melody that was written in the sheet music in the suitcase. It was the melody Valentina had hummed while Sophia tapped her feet on the rug. Valentina stared at her cell phone screen for a time she couldn't measure. Her heart beat at a rhythm that was no longer one of tiredness. She looked at the photo of the music school, at the teacher's name, at the date of the post. And she understood that the question Enzo had answered that morning was not yet over. Valentina spent 3 days verifying before saying a word. It was an instinct she had inherited from her mother. Constance Hayes didn't believe in hasty conclusions. "You confirm twice, and then you confirm again," the nurse always said, "because the haste to want something to be true is truth's greatest enemy." Valentina had grown up hearing this, and had spent much of her adolescence thinking her mother was excessively cautious. Now, at 24, and with a discovery that could change an entire family's life, she finally understood. The first thing she did was listen to the video more than 30 times. There was no doubt about the melody. She had hummed that progression of notes so many times in the toy room, making mistakes and correcting them, that she had memorized every variation. The woman in the video, sitting at an old piano in a simple school hall, played the same composition that was in the sheet music in the suitcase. Not a similar composition, the same one, with the same dynamic variations that were noted in the margins in handwriting leaning to the right. The video was dark, and the camera was too far away for the face to be clear. Dark hair, upright posture of someone who had played piano their whole life. 40 years old, perhaps. It could be anyone. The second thing Valentina did was call the music school. She used the landline phone number that appeared at the bottom of the website from an internet search, using her personal cell phone, at a time when Enzo was at the office and Sophia was in session with Dr. Leo. She stood on the back veranda with the empty garden below, feeling her heart beat faster than usual. A woman with a cheerful voice answered, identifying herself as Rosemary, secretary of the Horizon Music School in Fairview. Valentina introduced herself as a freelance journalist researching independent female composers from upstate for a report on chamber music, and asked about Professor Laura Mendez. Rosemary was silent for a second. "Professor Laura is very reserved, she said, with that specific caution of someone being loyal to another. She's been teaching here for 2 years and she's amazing. The students love her. But she doesn't usually give interviews. She prefers her work to speak for itself." "I understand," Valentina said. "Is she from Fairview?" "No. She came from New York City, if I'm not mistaken. But she doesn't talk much about before. She went through a difficult period of health, spent some time recovering here in the region, and ended up staying." Rosemary paused as if calculating how much she was saying. "She's a very good person, you know. It's just that she doesn't have much memory of the time before she arrived here. Her doctors say it's something that can improve with time." Valentina closed her eyes for a second. "Thank you," she said. "I won't need to bother the professor." She stayed on the veranda for a long time after hanging up. The garden below was quiet, the sprinklers off, the October sun casting short shadows on the grass. There was a bird somewhere she couldn't locate singing the same sequence of 3 repeated notes patiently, as if it knew someone would eventually listen. Amnesia. The word occupied Valentina's head with the solidity of a wall. Lara Drummond had left the hospital disoriented, had walked in some direction no camera had recorded, had found some path that led her to Fairview, 100 or so miles north of New York City, and she had rebuilt a new life with the fragments that survived oblivion. The music had survived. The piano had survived. But the names and faces and the apartment in West Village and the tight-jawed husband and the 7-year-old daughter who wore pink ballet slippers that had slipped away. On the 3rd night of verification, Valentina found one more piece. In an old forum for amateur musicians from upstate New York, there was a post from 2 years prior describing a woman who had appeared in the town without memory, but with the hands of a professional pianist. The post was from a general practitioner named Dr. Robert Jensen, who had treated Lara when she arrived in Fairview, and who was asking for help to identify the patient. There was a phone number and an email address that were almost 2 years old. Valentina tried both. The email bounced back. The number rang. The doctor answered on the 5th ring. Yes, he remembered the case. Yes, the woman had been identified only as Laura, a name she had given from fragmented memory, without a surname, without documents. Yes, there had been attempts at identification that had gone nowhere. No, she hadn't disappeared. She was well. She was in Fairview. She was receiving medical and psychological care. "Her autobiographical memory is very compromised," Dr. Roberts said, "but she is a completely functional person, creative, caring, much loved here. We tried for a while to identify the family. We couldn't." Pause. "Why are you asking?" Valentina told the truth. She said the name. She said everything. On the other end of the line, the doctor was silent for a long moment. "My God," he said. On the morning of the 4th day, Valentina went to Enzo's office at 8 in the morning. No note, no warning. She just knocked on the door and waited. "Come in." She entered, closed the door, and stood. She had the blue notebook in her hand with the photos of the sheet music inside. The video link noted, Dr. Roberts' number. There was an order in which she needed to tell this, an order that would be bearable. "I need to talk to you about something I discovered," she said, "and I need you to listen to me until the end, before you react." Enzo stopped looking at the project on his desk. He looked at her, and something in Valentina's face, some specific seriousness, made him lean back in his chair. "I'm listening." Valentina opened the little notebook. She started with the melody, with the video, with the call to the school, with Dr. Robert. She laid everything on the table with the precision of someone who had spent 3 days checking to make sure she wasn't building hope on sand. As she spoke, Enzo's face changed in a way she had never seen in anyone. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was that thing before joy, more akin to terror, that happens when something that was lost begins to take shape again, and the heart doesn't yet know if it can trust. When she finished, the silence lasted almost a full minute. "Are you sure?" he said. "I'm sure about the melody and about what the doctor told me. To be sure about the rest, we need to go to Fairview." Another silence. "She won't remember me." It wasn't a question. It was the most concrete fear in the world. "Perhaps not," Valentina said honestly. "But Dr. Roberts said her memory can respond to strong emotional stimuli. There's no guarantee, but there's also no guarantee that she won't respond. A pause. You spent 3 years not knowing if she was okay. Now you know. What are you going to do with that? Enzo looked at the table, at the projects, at the cup of cold coffee that was still in the corner, just like every morning. Then he opened the drawer, took out his car keys, and placed them on the table between them. Sophia is coming too, he said. I know, Valentina replied. They went the following Saturday. Enzo drove. Valentina sat in the passenger seat with the map open on her phone. Sophia sat in the back with the music box on her lap and the pink ballet slippers on, which she hadn't taken off since the day they found them, and which Enzo had looked at for 30 seconds before saying nothing about them. The road to Fairview passed through the countryside, between misty morning hills and small rural properties with signs selling sweets and cheeses. Sophia spent the entire trip looking out the window with that attention of someone saving every detail for a future occasion. Occasionally, her fingers tapped the familiar sequence on the glass. 212. I'm here. Valentina responded by tapping on the dashboard. I'm here too. The Horizon Music School was on a quiet street of old houses, in a residential neighborhood that smelled of bread and wet earth. It was a simple 2-story house, painted light yellow, with a small garden in front, where there was a wooden bench and an old mango tree. There was a sign on the gate with the school's name and class schedules. On Saturday morning, there was an adult piano class at 10 o'clock. It was 9:40 when Enzo's car stopped across the street. The three sat in silence for a moment. Valentina could hear, coming from inside the yellow house, with the windows open to the October warmth, the sound of someone playing piano, a progression of chords she recognized by heart. Enzo placed his hands on the steering wheel and kept his eyes fixed on the window of the house. I don't know how to do this, he said, with a voice that had no architecture within it. Sophia from the back seat said nothing, but she placed her hand on her father's shoulder. It was the first time in 3 years she had touched him. Enzo turned slowly. He looked at his daughter. And then, without a sound, without any soap opera dramatics, the most reserved architect in Greenwich, Connecticut, rested his forehead on his daughter's small hand and stayed like that for a moment with his eyes closed, breathing. When he lifted his face, he had made a decision. He opened the car door. The woman at the piano didn't look up when they entered. Her back was to the door, playing for herself in those 10 minutes before class began, with that concentration of someone who plays not to be heard, but because she cannot not play. Dark hair pulled back in a loose bun, a simple white blouse, shoulders slightly hunched forward in the movement that music demands. The room smelled of old wood and piano resin. Rosemary, the secretary, had greeted Valentina at the door with a look that said she knew much more than she had confirmed by phone. She had let the three in and closed the door behind them without asking questions, with the discretion of someone who understands that there are moments that don't fit into protocol. Enzo stopped in the middle of the room. Valentina stood beside Sophia near the wall. The girl was absolutely still, with the music box in her left hand and the pink ballet slippers on her feet, looking at the back of the woman at the piano. There was something in the way Sophia looked that wasn't conscious recognition. It was deeper. It was the kind of thing that happens before memory, in the place where the body stores what the mind hasn't yet processed. The woman finished the section she was playing. Her hands rested on the keyboard without pressing any keys, in that silence of someone in the interval between one musical phrase and the next. Laura, Enzo said. His voice came out lower than he had probably planned, but it filled the entire room. The woman remained still for a second. Then she slowly turned on the piano bench, and the face Valentina had seen blurred in a 12-year-old photo was there, clear, with the marks that time and history had left. There were lines that didn't exist in the magazine photo, a thin scar near her chin, dark eyes that were the same as in the photo, and at the same time different, like a song played in a slightly altered key. She looked at Enzo with an expression that was neither recognition nor strangeness. It was something in between, a tremor, like when a word is on the tip of your tongue and your brain knows it exists but can't find it. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice was calm, not aggressive, genuinely curious. "My name is Enzo," he said, and then stopped, because evidently there was a planned continuation that disappeared when he needed to use it. It was then that Sophia took a step forward. Valentina didn't try to hold her back. She stayed where she was, with her heart in her throat, and let her. The girl walked slowly across the wooden floor of the small music room, the pink ballet slippers making a soft sound with each step, and stopped less than a meter from the woman sitting on the piano bench. She looked at her face with that total intensity Sophia reserved for things that truly mattered. The woman lowered her eyes to the child. She looked at her face, at her black hair, at her slippers. The slippers. Something changed in her expression, like when a light comes on behind frosted glass. The shape changes before you see what's underneath. "These slippers," she said, and her voice failed in the middle of the sentence. She slowly knelt down until she was at the child's level. She extended her hand, not to touch the slippers, but pointing, as if needing to verify they were real. Her fingers stopped 2 centimeters from the worn pink satin at the tip. I had a pair like this," she said very slowly, like someone following a thread in the dark. "Just like this, with this wear here at the front." She looked up into the air, as if the memory were on the ceiling instead of inside her. "I kept them in a suitcase, in a brown leather suitcase." Valentina felt her own eyes sting. Sophia stared at the woman. And then she did something that was not in the script of any therapy, any protocol, any plan any adult had drawn. She opened the music box she carried in her left hand. The melody that came from that music box was the same as the sheet music. It was the same one Valentina had hummed in the toy room. It was the same one the woman had played in that amateur video from December, in a music school in Fairview, for a room full of children who didn't know they were listening to a composition that had been written for a single person. The woman at the piano closed her eyes. Her lips moved, very slightly, as if following the melody without permission, and then the tears began to appear, not with drama, not with sobs, silent, like the music coming from the music box, which didn't need volume to fill the entire space. "Sophia," she said. It wasn't a question, it was a discovery. A word that had been kept in a place where amnesia hadn't reached, in a place that was below names and addresses and years, in a place made of pink ballet slippers and handwritten melodies, and a girl she had carried within her body for 9 months and who she recognized before she could explain why. Sophia took the last step and threw herself into her mother's arms. The woman hugged her as if the hug was the only truly involuntary act the human body is capable of. With both arms, with her face buried in the child's black hair, with that embrace that is not force, it is an anchor. Enzo put his hand over his mouth. Valentina leaned against the wall and looked at the ceiling for a moment, because she needed somewhere to put everything that had no name. From the piano bench in her mother's lap, Sophia pulled back slightly. She looked at Lara's face up close, at her dark eyes that were just like hers. And then, with that voice that had been quiet for 3 years, with that child's voice that had grown in silence but never ceased to exist within, she said the word that had been waiting for someone who deserved it. Mama. The entire world stopped at that syllable. Enzo was kneeling on the floor when Valentina noticed, without her having seen the moment he went down. He was on his knees on the wooden floor of the small music room, head bowed, shoulders shaking in that silent way of crying that is the deepest of all, the one that needs no sound, because it has passed any point where sound would be sufficient. Lara looked at her husband, and in that look there was a struggle, the visible effort of a memory trying to reconstruct a world from a single point of light. She didn't say his name, not yet, but she extended her free hand towards him. He took it. Valentina left the room silently and closed the door carefully. She stood outside in the hallway, leaning against the wall with the blue notebook against her chest, listening through the glass to the melody of the music box that was still playing inside. Rosemary appeared from the end of the hallway with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that said it was much easier to deal with all of this if coffee was involved. She handed a cup to Valentina without asking. The two stood there in the hallway, drinking in silence, while on the other side of the door, something happened that had no category because it was simply life. The months that followed were not simple. Lara gradually returned to New York City, with intensive medical supervision and much of the kind of patience none of the three had expected to need. The memories didn't all return at once, like in a movie. They returned in fragments, disorganized, sometimes painful, sometimes unexpectedly joyful. There were days when she woke up and knew who Enzo was with all the clarity in the world, and there were days when she needed someone to remind her of her address. Dr. Robert and Dr. Leo began to work together, and Enzo began to have morning meetings with doctors instead of clients, which was, in Valentina's assessment, a significant improvement in the quality of the meetings. Sophia blossomed in a way that Dr. Leo documented with that scientific enthusiasm of someone who knows they are seeing something rare. 6 weeks after the meeting in Fairview, she said her third word. It was piano. She said it during a session where Lara was playing for her, a rainy Sunday afternoon with the smell of coffee in the kitchen. After piano came others, tumbling out at their own pace, not at the pace adults expected. Valentina remained in the house, not as a waitress, obviously, not exactly as a caregiver, because Sophia needed less and less to be cared for, and more to simply be accompanied. She stayed because she had unknowingly put down roots in those walls, and because Enzo had approached her one April afternoon with a proposal that began with, "I have a project," and ended with a number that made Valentina call her mother immediately afterward and remain silent for 10 seconds before she could speak. The Lara Drummond Institute was founded in a renovated warehouse in Dumbo, Brooklyn, 6 months after the meeting in Fairview. Its objective was to support neurodivergent children through art, music, and movement, with free services for low-income families. The facade was light pink, Sophia's idea, who had gotten involved in the decision-making process with an assertiveness that made Enzo laugh for the first time in a long time, that unprompted laugh that comes out before the person decides they will laugh. At the inauguration, on a warm and sunny October afternoon, with a garden full of families and children and a music trio playing live in the corner, Sophia asked to give a speech. No adult in the room knew she had prepared a speech. She simply climbed onto the small platform in the garden, in her white dress and pink ballet slippers, and stood in front of the microphone. There was a total silence. "My name is Sophia," she said, with that voice that had been quiet for 3 years, and now had back all the seriousness of a child who knows exactly what she wants to say. "I was unable to speak for a long time, but I never stopped listening, and I learned that sometimes the most important thing someone can do is to extend a hand and wait." She looked at Valentina, who was in the front row with her eyes already betraying what she was feeling. She looked at her father, standing beside Lara, with her hand in his, and she looked at her mother. "Thank you for staying," she said. Then she stepped down from the platform, as if it were the simplest thing in the world, walked to Valentina, took her hand, walked to her father and mother, and joined their 4 hands. She looked at the 3 adults with that expression of someone who had solved the most difficult problem and thought the others were taking a little too long to realize. "Family," she said. It was the word she had first said in the small music room in Fairview, when the 4 had left the door together at the end of that morning, and Sophia had stopped in the garden in front of the old mango tree and looked at the 3 of them and said that single word with the exactness of someone naming something that had always existed but had not yet had a name. Valentina Hayes' story didn't begin with a plan. It began with an outstretched hand on a gala night, without words, without guarantee that anyone would accept it. It began with the courage to look when everyone else was looking away, and she discovered along the way that healing rarely comes from where we expect it. It comes from a melody the body remembers, even when the mind forgets. It comes from a child who decides, in her own time, that the world is worth the risk of a step. It comes from a father who finally allows the walls to fall. And sometimes, when life has the kind of generosity no invented story can surpass, it comes from a brown leather suitcase stored in a cedar closet, waiting for the day someone would be brave enough to open it. End of story. If Valentina, Sophia, and Lara's journey touched your heart, know that the most beautiful story might be waiting for someone who simply decides to look where others look away. Share this story with someone who needs to believe that new beginnings are possible. Let us know in the comments what moment touched you the most, and subscribe so you don't miss the next stories we have for you. Every story we tell is an outstretched hand, and we believe you will accept it.